Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Spirit of Le Mans 2.0, if you will, where for those who don't know, we're actually revisiting the very first car review series that I ever did on the channel, called Spirit of Le Mans, which is for all of the prototype class race cars, LMPs and Group Cs and GT1s, that kind of thing, in the Gran Turismo series. And we're revisiting them with better graphics, of course a better camera, the new style of reviews, etc. Now this is a car which a ton of people have been waiting for me to revisit. It's one of easily the cars that's up there in terms of people wanting it back in Gran Turismo Sport, or maybe in the next game after that as well. But I will say straight off the bat that some of the things that I have to say about this car you might not like if you are a super fan of it. Now I want to go straight off the bat by saying I do like the Toyota TS020. I love the GT1 road car. I strongly believe it's one of the most beautiful Japanese cars ever designed, and I think it's one of the best looking prototype race cars ever built, and I honestly, genuinely wish they had won Le Mans in the late 90s instead of the Porsche 911 GT1, because Porsche has plenty of victories. It would have been appropriate, I think, for the GT1 to be the second Japanese car after the Mazda 787B to actually win Le Mans, but of course, famously thanks to a tyre blowout, that did not happen, even though they were leading the race. So I think that's a shame. I do wish they'd won. And even in Gran Turismo, the GT1 is a legend. I would put it up there with stuff like the Suzuki Escudo and the Castrol Supra for being the most iconic kind of godfathers of the Gran Turismo series. But with all of that being said, the single biggest qualm or issue that I have with this car is actually not to do with the car itself, it's more to do with the way Gran Turismo has evolved. Because if you drive the GT1 in Gran Turismo 2, or even Gran Turismo 3, it feels great. In Gran Turismo 4, there was an inkling of something that was beginning to change. And that inkling was that the field was getting broader. And what I mean by that is, in Gran Turismo 2, it had only one natural rival, the Nissan R390. In Gran Turismo 3, it had only two natural rivals, that same Nissan and the freshly added Mazda 787B, also a legend in its own right and for good reason. It wasn't until Gran Turismo 4 where these vehicles, those three kings, if you will, of the Asian prototype class in Gran Turismo, started to see some not just heady competition, but legitimately challenging competition, because in Gran Turismo 4 and then carried over to GT5 and 6 and even beyond now into GT Sport, we started to see so many more non-Asian legendary prototypes added to the game. Bentley Speed 8, Mercedes Sauber C9, Pescarolos, Peugeot 908, Audi R8, some fantastic cars, and even the ones that weren't as good, like maybe the CLK-LM or the Panos, they were still great cars, just not quite as good as the others. That issue, I believe, came to a head in GT6 though, because when I've gone back to redrive and review, if you will, these prototypes, the Toyota is the one that has not aged as well. And the reason why I say that is because most of the others, even something as nuts as the Minolta, can actually cope with the fully tuned power and torque and performance surprisingly well. They do a good job of it. The Minolta, for instance, would not feel out of place in GT Sport. It would be a very fast car. However, the GT1 has not aged as well. It doesn't have the kind of planted weight that the R390 has, which gives it almost a touring car kind of handling. Instead, this car chronically spins its tyres almost all the time when it's tuned. And there are some cars that give it a legitimate reason why it should be better than that. Even something like the Audi R8 Team Orica, which is heavier than this, 50 kilos more, and should not be anywhere near as quick. That car, as you'll see in a future revisiting episode, handles amazingly well, and even fully tuned, you can put the power down easily. When it comes to this Toyota though, when it is fully tuned in particular, which is the way that I review all of these cars in Spirit of Le Mans, it's putting out 1,118 horsepower, which is a huge amount, of course. But at the same time, that's not the highest of the category. There are quite a few that have more than that. Even the Nissan R89C has more than that, for instance. It also has 838 pound-feet of torque, which is great, don't get me wrong, it's certainly got the pulling power, But again, it's not exactly like it's got to cope with some phenomenal amount of torque that something else like a Peugeot, for instance, or an Audi R10 doesn't have to cope with anyway. They've got almost double that amount of torque, and they still don't wheel spin as much. It weighs 900 kilos, so it's not like it's so light that it's got no grip, and it's not that it's so heavy that it's unbalanced. It's just a car that hasn't aged as well as some others. Now, with all of that being said, I'm not by any means saying that the TS020 can't win races, that it can't set great laps. Under certain circumstances, it might even be what I would recommend as a go-to car. However, what I am saying is, if this Toyota were to, for instance, return in GT Sport or a future game, I don't think it will be as good as many people hope it would be. Because the late 90s GT1 era is different anyway. The R390 is very different to something like a Sauber C9, for example. But I think some people might be shocked and maybe even a bit disappointed or annoyed at just how different this would feel in a much more realistic game. Because you've got to bear in mind, all of these prototypes can basically do 280, 290, 300 miles an hour. They would never be doing that kind of thing in GT Sport. None of them are anywhere near as powerful as they used to be. This would not be either. And the reason why that concerns me is for the same reason why it would potentially concern me about the Minolta. Because as fast as that car is, most of its advantage comes from the sheer overwhelming speed and power. That advantage is gone in GT Sport, and just look as an example at what difference that made to the Nissan R92 CP. That used to be an absolute speed machine as well. Now, it's good, but it's certainly not going to worry a Peugeot 908 in their fully tuned forms in GT Sport, and probably beyond into the next game as well if it does use a similar physics engine, and chances are it probably will. This Toyota relies on that overwhelming straight line speed, because without that, the handling simply is not good enough to beat the majority of the other prototypes in the game. Even something like an Audi R10 is far more justified than this is to have wheel spin, and yet it still feels more manageable. This just spins those wheels constantly, and of course I am running an extreme amount of power, but as I said, I run that kind of power with all of these cars, so all of them cope with it far better than this one does. It doesn't affect my love for the car. I still think it's one of the best looking Japanese cars ever. It's got phenomenal performance, and it's still certainly a car that can win plenty of events. I just think that for all the people who are clamouring for it, you might be disappointed if it does return, because it's not going to be anywhere near as quick, chances are, as it is in all of the previous games, and I can guarantee it will not be as OP as it has been in all of the previous other games. Overall then, it's a car that I definitely have a lot of love for. It's easily one of the most nostalgic cars of the entire franchise, and for good reason. It is a phenomenal machine that almost won Le Mans, so credit where it's due, but, of course, have measured expectations when it comes to this car potentially coming back. Overall, tell me your thoughts down below. Have you gone back to GT6 recently and driven the car? If so, what did you think of it? And of course, if you haven't experienced the car before, PlayStation 3s and copies of GT6 aren't that expensive these days, so go back and check it out, along with a ton of others as well, which we don't have simply in GT Sport. But overall, that's it for this review. I'll see you next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.